Look at this statement by Dawkins. He says, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Do you understand what he's saying? I know it looks designed, I know it looks like it had a purpose, but it doesn't. Interesting statement. Now, Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA, brilliant man. Biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Can you imagine this? A student in Dr. Crick's class. Dr. Crick is saying, repeat after me. It was not designed. It was not designed. It was not designed. Why do you have to do that? Because it looks designed. Can you imagine if the forensic investigator or the insurance investigator coming upon the scene and saying, boy, it sure looks like arson to me, but no, we can't accept that argument. Oh, sure looks to me like this guy was murdered, but no, we can't accept that. It has to be an accident. Do you understand what is happening here? The evidence points that someone started the fire. The evidence points that someone had a hand in this murder, but we will turn a blind eye to it. Why? Because we've shut ourselves off of anything outside the box. And so Dawkins and Crick and others are now in the mode of trying to convince us to say, look, repeat after me, it was not designed. It just appears that way. Well, you know what? It's really kind of silly, is it not? I don't know how many of you have driven by Mount Rushmore, but I guarantee you, people don't drive by Mount Rushmore and say, hey kids, look what the rain and the snow and the wind have done to this mountain here. Well, by golly, that looks a little like George Washington. And what a coincidence, right next to him is something that looks a little like Thomas Jefferson. No one would do that. How is it that we know that when we walk along the ground and someone discovers an arrowhead, that it's not just a weird-looking rock? We recognize design. It is obvious to us. In fact, it is plain to us. Why do we turn away from it? Charles Darwin said, I remember well the time when the thought of the eye made me cold all over. Why do you suppose the thought of the eye made Darwin cold all over?
Because it doesn't work.
It doesn't fit. There is so much incredible design within the eye. He says, but I've got over the stage of the complaint, and now small, trifling particulars of structure often make me very uncomfortable. The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick. Why did a peacock's feather make Darwin sick? Why do you suppose, Jay?
It's like someone actually designed it.
How did the peacock somehow create this feather with what looks like an eye on it? Oh, the heavens declare the glory of God. All you have to do is look. All you have to do is look, because it is plain to us. Rejecting the truth, they have exchanged the truth of God for a lie. So Darwin, recall, giving us the criteria for which we could say that his theory is broken down. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. And this is exactly what has occurred. Dr. Michael Behe, in the publication of his book, Darwin's Black Box, fired a shot across the bow of the issue of evolution. And this is how he did it. Dr. Michael Behe one day was studying the complexity of the cell and turned to someone in the lab with him, and he simply asked the question, looking at all of these pieces of the cell which we have just seen, asking the question, how could this cell exist? Could this cell exist if this piece were not there? And of course the answer was no. Well, what if this piece were not there? No. In essence, what Dr. Behe came to was the concept that he calls irreducible complexity. And he uses a mousetrap as an example of irreducible complexity. It goes something like this. He says, if you take a mousetrap, a very simple device, it only has a few parts in it. The wooden base, the spring, the dinner plate, little neck breaker, and the little piece that holds the neck breaker back until an appropriate moment. Behe says, how well would the mousetrap work if one of the pieces were not there? Let's suppose that the spring were not there. The mouse would love it, but it wouldn't really work. What if, and in this mousetrap, there's just a little staple holding down one end of the rod between the spring? What would happen to the mousetrap? Well, I happen to have one of those for my house. The little staple came out. That's all that happened. Everything else is there. All the pieces are there, but the little staple that holds it in is not there anymore. How well does the mousetrap function? It does not. So Behe's argument is this. What we have discovered, the more we've opened up Darwin's black box, the cell being the black box, what we have discovered in there is the most intricate machinery. And he says, it is a machinery which is irreducibly complex. And what do we conclude? Using Darwin's own criteria, to Darwin, he said, the cell was a black box. Its inner workings were utterly mysterious to him. Now the black box has been opened up, and we know how it works. Applying Darwin's test to the ultra-complex world of molecular machinery and cellular systems that have been discovered over the past 40 years, we can say that Darwin's theory has absolutely broken down. Now, how do we contrast that with these statements that evolutionary theory is a fact? All of a sudden now, using Darwin's own criteria to say, this thing is broken down. Absolutely broken down. Let's take a look. Let's go back inside, down to the level in which we can actually begin to see the machinery and how that machinery works. That little piece that was constructed that we saw in the inner cell, that little piece taken by the machinery, now taken to a place and assembled in a larger piece of machinery, creates some of the most incredible workings within the living organism, and we're going to take a look at one called the Bacteria Flagellum.
Scott Minnick has studied the flagellar motor for nearly 20 years. His research has led him to challenge the co-option argument.
With a bacterial flagellum, you're talking about a machine that's got 40 structural parts. Yes, we find 10 of them are involved in another molecular machine, but the other 30 are unique. So where are you going to borrow them from? Eventually, you're going to have to account for the function of every single part as originally having some other purpose. So you can only follow that argument so far until you run into the problem of you're borrowing parts from nothing. But even if you concede that you have all the parts necessary to build one of these machines, that's only part of the problem. Maybe even more complex, I think more complex, is the assembly instructions. That is never addressed by opponents of the irreducible complexity argument.
Studies of the bacterial motor have indeed revealed an even deeper level of complexity, for its construction not only requires specific parts, but also a precise sequence of assembly.
You've got to make things at the right time. You've got to make the right number of components. You've got to assemble them in a sequential manner. You've got to be able to tell if you've assembled it properly so that you don't waste energy building a structure that's not going to be functional.